Hey up and welcome to the Temple of Blair. This is a conversation with Bob Nalbandian. Now Bob has a very long and storied career in the music industry, and we focus on the more recent parts of his career, notably the Shockwaves Skullsessions Podcast and his documentary series Inside Metal. Well, obviously a point of interest to me is he is the Steve Ricardo of the West Coast in that he opened the LA office for Roadrunner, and that's a little bit of a blind spot in my research, so I was very, very happy to speak with Bob and unpack some of that for the project. So let's jump into it. Thank you very much to Bob. Keep your eye out for the Bay Area Godfathers documentary that should be approaching streaming services soon. But just give Inside Metal a bit of a googs, mate. You'll get all the information there. All right, 1, 2, fuck it up. I had a really hectic few interview weeks. So I had one earlier today. I had a podcast last night, and last week I had 5 interviews over 4 days. And then the rest of the time I spent editing that, one of which was Mike Varney.
Oh, really? Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. He's a great dude, Mike. He was in a couple of my documentaries, yeah.
Yeah, I was just like that Leonardo DiCaprio meme. When I saw Mike Varney in the Bay Area Godfather, I was just like, I'm speaking to him tomorrow.
That's great, yeah. Now, is that for Roadrunner too, or is that something different?
Yep, all for Roadrunner.
So all your podcasts are for, okay. That's right. He did Roadrunner distributed the Shrapnel stuff overseas for him.
Yeah. I spoke to Brian Slagle as well. So you have these titans of metal industry, and I just forced him into talking about another company.
Well, cool.
But yeah, it was really good because obviously with Shrapnel, it was very much a US operation up until 85 when Case Vessels came into the picture and started sending the guitar virtuosity that he was so well known for overseas and into Europe and even into Japan. And I thought that's noteworthy as a business custom, because Case didn't need to do that. Roadrunner didn't need to go that far with it, but it just spoke to the strength of the Roadrunner brand, that it was willing to make those connections, and that the licensing arm was such a strong part of that business model.
Well, it was a great business move. I mean, a lot of those. Should I put on headphones? Am I echoing a bit?
No, you're absolutely fine.
You sure? Okay. But I was going to say, labels like Roadrunner and of course Music for Nations, they ended up licensing. They licensed, the Megaforce and I think some of the early Metal Blade stuff maybe as well. But a lot of those European companies, they knew there was a huge market for this new up-and-coming U.S. bands, whether it be bands like, Metallica and Slayer, or, Steeler with Yngwie and all these Guitar Hero kind of people, all the stuff that was out on Shrapnel, Exciter, all those bands. So, it was a good business move, and it was a good move for those. And then, of course, eventually Metal Blade started a European office, and, Roadrunner took off on their own, obviously, internationally. But, that was a big thing. I mean, in the 90s, I was licensing a lot of stuff to Japan, and it was really good money back then, because a lot of these 80s metal bands that really, were kind of dead in the water in Los Angeles by the mid-90s, early to mid-90s, Japan, they were still monstrous out there. So, we could get some good license deals in Japan and territories like that, as well as Europe,
One of the main things I ask people with that kind of experience is, why is Japan such a weird market? Because you have to, from a business perspective, you've got to devise an entirely new strategy to appease that market. And that's the thing I don't think anyone's prepared for. I don't think Brian was prepared for it. I don't think Case was necessarily prepared for it. I think Mike just somehow, he had the product which responded really well.
Yeah.
But,
they love guitar virtuosos, I mean, Marty Friedman's a guitar god out there, even before he moved out there, with Cacophony. So was Jason Becker. Paul Gilbert is a good, I mean, nobody knows of Mr. Big here anymore. In Japan, they could still sell out the Tokyo Dome or whatever. Same with bands like Dokken and all those, Firehouse and Danger and bands like that could go over to Japan and do very, very well still, Steelheart. So it's, they're just old school. They never, even though they are very trendy, when it comes to the pop music, they're always been into musicianship, I think. And so they never caught on to the grunge thing like we did. I mean, of course, a lot of those grunge bands were big out there, but they still showed, it wasn't the type of thing, okay, now it's all about this. We got to drop the 80s stuff. They still had a love for good, talented, guitar playing and rock and roll. So yeah, it's not too much of a surprise. It's just, more traditional, I think.
Maybe it is like a prestige economy. Like we talk about virtuosity, but it's also like a collector's market. And I think the two things the thread that connects those things together is an element of prestige. I don't use the word elite. I think there's better words I could be using, but my vocabulary is failing me. But I think there's threads between these things which can outline the Japanese market as to why certain things are effective there. And it is because they like guitarists, and I think they like certain tangible things, which is why they tend to like that. They don't have a lot of clubs, but they have a lot of vinyl cafes, don't they? Where it's just like a layout of a bar or a cafe or something like that, and it's just wall to wall full of vinyls.
Yeah.
I think
I've heard about that.
Yeah, so I think there's just something to that which speaks to the Japanese sensibilities, which we as a market never really got on, never really understood and never really mastered. But as time goes on, we uncover and we utilize and weaponize more things and more things that we understand that they respond to, and therefore we can cater for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never been to Japan, but what you're saying is definitely true, especially when you say it's more of a tangible market. CDs are still huge in Japan. They still sell tons of CDs. And that's where, again, a lot of bands and 80s bands do well there because they can actually make money selling CDs in Japan because they like the tangible thing. I've got a good friend, John Harrell from Burn Magazine. He's the U.S. correspondent for Burn, which is one of the biggest rock magazines really worldwide now. Beautiful, full color. It's like a book. And I'm like, dude, how does that survive now? I mean, the print costs, and they pay incredibly well to the photographers and the staff. I said, how, the market must have died. I mean, of course, here in the States, all those 80s magazines, Rip, all those things, they're dead. Everything's online. He goes, no, dude, it's still, he says, it might not be selling as well as it did in the 80s or 90s, but it's still selling great. So Japan, they like that chance. They like the booklets, they read a lot of books, magazines, a big, giant, full color magazines, CDs. They like that. They're not just about downloading or reading blogs and this and that. They want the actual physical product, which I think is a great thing. I wish it was kind of more like that here. I mean, I know there are a lot of collectors here that collect vinyl and CDs and stuff, but it's just the easy access. And I've been spoiled that way, with my, because I live in a small apartment, so I can't have the big vinyl, and even my CD collections are like too much now, and it's just so easy to go on, Spotify or whatever, or YouTube, and just, at a click, you got it right there. So, I understand both ways, but it's good that Japan is still old school like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It keeps it challenging.
Yeah.
For, vendors and suppliers. Anyway, Bob, I reached out to yourself because a number of reasons. One, I quite like your podcast. I was doing some research on the Roadrunner stuff, and Monty Connor's he's an elusive character in terms of the interview world. He doesn't do a right lot of them, but he was on Shockwaves a couple of times where I believe when he was arguing with yourself and Martin Popoff about Aerosmith, early Aerosmith. I was like, it's just
that was an oldie, yeah.
Yeah. It was just an enjoyable conversation to listen to. And then
we love that when him and Martin go at it head to head.
Then I got into a couple of the inside metal documentaries, and then I realized, oh shit, I'm stepping on Bob's feet. There's a Roadrunner documentary that's bound to be made, and Bob might be the one that's already got it in the back of his head. So I best have a chat with him to make sure I'm not. I have to deploy some clash management or something like that. And then I checked out your LinkedIn and noticed, oh shit, you worked at the LA office,
right?
And I
only worked there for a little while. I never thought about a Roadrunner documentary. Actually, I don't know if that would be something I would be. I don't know that much about. I mean, I remember when the label started and Case Wessels and some of the early U.S. releases with Annihilator when Monty first started, because it was a small market. We all knew each other. I don't know if I was actually ever pen pals with Monty. I might have been, but I remember him at the radio station before Roadrunner. And so, everyone kind of knew each other. I was doing some stuff with Metal Rendezvous at the time, Metal Rendezvous magazine. And prior to that, I had my own fanzine called The Headbanger since 1982. So we were all in that clique, Brian Slagle and Ron Quintana and John Stranansky. And then, of course, the people overseas as well. The guys from Kerrang and Metal Forces and Aardschok, we all, knew each other. And, Roadrunner was kind of a part of that clique. And I don't know if you want to jump into how I started there, or
let's wait, because the reason I gave you usually I have quite a lot of questions, but because your history and your CV is generally so rich, I was like, well, let me just put these questions in this order, because I know we're going to go around the houses and we're going to go down many rabbit holes. So don't consider those questions like a limit. We should just do whatever the fuck we feel like. But I tend to always open it with the pluggables and the things that you're doing now, simply because I hate it when podcasts wait to the end of the interview to go, now tell me what you're doing, this week. Fuck that. Right. Tell me everything you're doing and what's your world looking like these days?
Right now, it's kind of mellow. I'm a bit older now, obviously. I still have a passion for hard rock and metal and kind of doing the independent things. So, I've kept the podcast going. I've obviously, as you spoke about, directed the Inside Metal documentaries. We've got 8 of them now. Actually 4 titles, each is 2 parts. So actually 8 movies. The latest one is Bay Area Godfathers. We just put out part 2 on DVD, and we're waiting for it to get to streaming. We had a little bit of technical issues with the audio for some of the digital markets. So we're getting that fixed. So it should go to streaming in a couple weeks. But that's done very well. And of course, the Inside Metal LA titles, Pioneers of LA Hard Rock and Roll, or Hard Rock and Metal, LA Metal Scene Explodes, and Rise of LA Thrash Metal have done very well. And they're all available on Amazon Prime and Google Play and iTunes and, Vudu, a lot of those different digital sites. And it's fun. It's, very independent, very, more of a low budget kind of, but that's what I kind of like. It's that it kind of gives that underground feel, and it kind of, brings you back to that era, of that. And it kind of, it's just fun doing. And same with the podcast. We keep it kind of old school metal. We've had Monty on it a few times, and the Shockwaves Skullsessions is more of a discussion style podcast. And we started that. When I started that was through Roadrunner Records website, actually.
Really?
When I did that in the, when I started that, 2008, 2007, 2008, because Monty and I were doing, I had him on my other podcast, the Shockwaves Hard Radio, with him, and we would go through discographies of bands, Aerosmith, Deep Purple, Judas Priest, and we did a couple of those. And he said, "Hey, man, this is a great thing. I'll see if I could maybe get Roadrunner to, do it through the website." So he hooked that up, and at the time, Roadrunner was also doing Blabbermouth. Before they went independent. And so it was a good avenue, and it was fun, and we just kept it fun. So Monty was in a lot of those, especially going through the band catalogs, which are always kind of a fun thing. And, sometimes we'd go over it with, someone like Bill Ward. We'd go over the Black Sabbath catalog, or, we did or some recent ones with Angel. We went through the Angel catalog with Monty and Don Jameson. And so it's always kind of fun, doing that kind of thing. And we did more with Thin Lizzy with Scott Gorham, but that's kind of what I'm doing now. So I've been doing that and a few other independent things here and there, but I still have my foot in the metal scene, just as more of an enjoyment thing. I never wanted it to be work, so to speak, where I don't enjoy it. I always said to myself, when I don't enjoy it, it's when I'm going to stop doing it. So I keep it where it's something that I could be happy with and still enjoy. When it gets to something that it's too much bullshit, it's like, nah, that's when it's
drop it. Yeah. I have production questions as because I watched the Bay Area doc. And obviously, as I'm about to embark on this journey, doing this Roadrunner thing properly, I noticed you managed to get a very high volume of input from participants. Did you go out to each of those individually, or did you have some of them film themselves? I'm trying to think you must have gone about it a really pragmatic way, and I'm trying to think of how, like, I'm not going to fly to Australia, but there was a Roadrunner office in Australia, so is there a way around that, you know?
No, we actually, fortunately, I'm from California, LA, so you know, when I did all the LA titles, it was very easy living in LA. You know, we did take a couple trips. You know, we went to Metallica HQ where I filmed Lars with my team, you know, Joe Floyd and Carl Alvarez at the time, and went to Vegas where we filmed a few people like Mike Varney, who lives in Vegas now. But those are all easy, quick trips. And then in the Bay Area, actually, and I'm actually living up here now because my camera guy lives in San Jose, and I was actually living in Sacramento, driving back and forth doing interviews. And my partner and producer, John Stranansky, who did Metal Rendezvous magazine back in the 80s, and we've remained close friends. And he kind of, you know, he's got a full-time corporate job in Dallas, but he wanted to, you know, really get back involved. He had the itch to get back involved in metal. And, you know, he was able to take some time off and fly back. So he set up a lot of the interviews because he grew up in the Bay Area. He knew all these guys. He was at all those early shows at the Stone, and those first Metallica shows in San Francisco. And so he got a lot of the interviews. So to answer your question, yeah, we filmed everything pretty much ourselves. And then Danny Shipman, the other producer and who also edited the movie, does a Reality Check TV. He did some of the interviews on his own with just his camcorder. So you see some of those little camcorder interviews, which I like. You know, a lot of people, you know, we had sometimes you get some QC issues with you know that, you know, with the camera mic, but I think it's kind of, it just shows us, you know, it's that guerrilla type, you know, filming, you know, so some of it's very professionally shot. Some of it's like that. Some of the people he got like Death Angel straight off the stage, you know, of a show. So it kind of gives it that, where it's not just a bunch of talking heads, in this nice studio and everything's, you know, plush. So it's kind of got that diversity. So, but yeah, all of them were shot between myself and, you know, my partner, Alex Gray, who was the photographer, cameraman on most of the stuff, and Danny Shipman, pretty much. And then, were there any shot on? We might have had a couple people that shot stuff that were out of town. I'm trying to think, but you know, a lot of the footage we shot were footage that were used in all the documentaries, like Dave Meniketti. We used him in all the LA documentaries because Y&T and Yesterday and Today, as they were at the time, used to come down to the Starwood and the Whiskey and play all the time back in the early, as much as they played in San Francisco, they were down in LA. So we had him and of course Lars and all these other people that were in the LA documents. So we had a lot of footage that was already shot, you know, and you know, what made me decide to do the San Francisco is we had so many people talking about going up to the Bay Area, not just the San Francisco bands, but, you know, bands like, you know, Megadeth and Suicidal and you know, whoever, Gene Hoglan, you know, with Dark Angel. And I said, you know, why not do something on the Bay Area one? It's easy enough. And so, yeah, that's how that came to fruition.
I think it's a good thing though, because these days scenes they are not geography specific. It just isn't that way anymore. It's impossible with the way that information is like decimated. So, or disseminated, whichever the word is. So I think you did well to just cast the net nice and wide and get as many voices in who are still with us as possible.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you said that. I was talking about that to somebody the other day, and as close as LA, because, you know, a lot of people from Europe and others, or they don't know. Some of them don't realize how close LA is to San Francisco. You know, it's a 7-hour drive, if that, you know. So it's not, you know, geographically that far. I guess, you know, Europe things are a bit different. California is obviously a very big state, but it's very similar. A lot of the LA bands, you know, like of course Metallica, Slayer, Armored Saint, they'd go to the Bay Area, they'd come back, you know. So it was, you kind of had that mix, but there was definitely a different vibe, and not just like from the LA bands to the San Francisco bands to the New York bands, all the different sound and different kind of style. Whereas, as you say now, you could be from anywhere. I remember, you know, bands in Australia, they all had that AC/DC kind of bluesy, you know, whether it be AC/DC, Rose Tattoo, the Angels, all those bands. And then you had, the bands I remember, Taipan, Bengal Tigers, all these different bands coming out of there. And they had a certain sound. The French bands, they all sang in French. They all had a very unique sound, the German bands had that kraut metal sound. They all sounded like either Scorpions or Accept. You had bands like Trance that sounded like Scorpions, Breaker that sounded like Accept, all that. And then the Dutch bands, and then the Japanese bands. But you could separate, that's a very new wave of British heavy metal sound. They sound very British, Nowadays, that doesn't matter. You could have a band that sounds just like Korn from Australia or from Israel, that there's, what was cool back then, that their cultures, you could hear the different culture in their sound, and that is definitely missing these days. And that's just because, like I say, the internet, everything's, because back then we had to trade tapes through the mail and stuff. So it was a whole different vibe. Of course, you had influences. A lot of the LA bands tried to sound like the new wave of British heavy metal bands. Metallica, of course, they were the big influence, but they still had their own thing going. Obviously Metallica. So yeah, interesting.
I think the service that you're offering effectively, though, is you're providing the etymology of what we're going to be calling certain genres. Because if I said I'm from a thrash metal band from Berlin, nowadays that means fucking nothing. But if I told you it sounds like Bay Area thrash, then you sort of go, aha, now there's a context, because we got all these people to talk about that same thing. But yeah.
Sure. Well, I remember the German thrash bands. That was a big thing. Sodom, Destruction, Creator, a Tankard, and then you had a Hellhammer from Switzerland, So, and that was kind of their own thing. That was the German, thrash metal. Which was different than the U.S., Bay Area thrash metal. So, I kind of miss that. That was what was so cool and unique back then, and then you had all those other German bands, Running Wild and Gravedigger and all these, Halloween, of course, and of course Accept. But that was kind of the cool thing back then. And now, like you said, you don't even know or don't care where the band's from, Spain. Oh, okay, they just sound like any other band. And now you hear a lot of these bands from Sweden that sound like they're going back to that LA 80s kind of hair metal sound, which I think is cool. But it's, now you have all those influences. Before, it was on your own. You just kind of, you had the 70s influence, in the early 80s, but you had to kind of create your own thing. And that's what was so cool about the early 80s metal scene and the tape trading scene and the fanzines back then. It was exciting. It was new. When Venom came out, there was no band that sounded remotely, oh my God, they're singing about Satan. It's like, this is crazy, now it's nothing. You hear Venom, that's silly,
Yeah.
But, it's funny. But that was what was so cool about it back then.
Just speaking to like the different kinds of like metal and different kinds of thrash, there is a UK thrash documentary, the history of UK specific thrash, and there's also one on German thrash, but they'll never see the light of day.
Wow.
Because they used original music, or licensed music, rather, and couldn't get the licenses for it.
That's where we were smart. And, a lot of people, we got a lot of criticism. Dude, what are you playing? You're not playing like, even, to play stuff like Exodus and bands like that. They were on Capitol. They had a major publishing company. To get the licensing, that's hundreds of dollars to use for what, 2 minutes of music, and that shit adds up. And, we didn't have that kind of budget. So, my good friend, I don't know if you know Ralph Vieira, he does several podcasts and stuff. He was in a band, still in a band, Thrash or Die, which has a total Bay Area 80s thrash metal sound. So we used a lot of their music in it. And we used similar bands, bands that were friends of mine that had demo tapes or that had unlicensed music, or they owned their own music, and they were more than happy to contribute, for free. Just give us credits in the credits, and a lot of it helped these bands. They said, man, since we're in your movie, we've got this whole new fan base, which is cool. And that's cool. That's like the old school kind of way of just, friendship and this and that. Now it's all about business, and it's labels aren't making any money anymore. So, you can't even use, I had a friend that did a guy here in the Bay Area did a documentary on bootlegs. He was a big video bootlegger, and he had all this, and it was a great documentary. He had like Dave Mustaine was in it, Ian Gillan. I mean, he had some major people like talking it, but he used the music, and he goes, well, I can't, when you do something like that, a live band, and you have bands like Tool and Nine Inch Nails and Metallica, video bootlegs, you can't substitute their music when you're showing the video to that kind of stuff. Yep. And I said, dude, there's no way you're going to get licensed. Oh, but I only did like a minute. I said, it doesn't matter. You're not. And of course, that's dead in the water, So yep. It's a shame, but that's how it is. But that's the biggest challenge. You could use video footage as long as it's your own video footage shot. And we're very fortunate that Reality Check TV, Danny Shipman and Hugh, who were the two editors, they had all this footage since the late 80s, early 90s from the Bay Area scene that we had access to. So, we just put a bed of music underneath that kind of sounded similar. And, same thing. They also worked on another documentary I did for Cleopatra called Band vs. Brand.
I didn't get around to watching it, but I'm fascinated by the concept that someone's actually asked the question.
Actually, it's a really good movie, and a lot of people really love it. It's more on the business end, but it really is about the importance of branding in music, particularly hard rock and metal. Mm-hmm. And they were involved in that as well, and offered a lot of footage. So I was very lucky to be able to do this on a low budget, but work with some really key people and make it into a really cool. I think all the films we did, whatever team I had, from the LA people, from having a Joe Floyd and Curtis as an editor, and Carl Alvarez and Rob. They all were metalheads too, and so we were all kind of on the same team, and which made it a lot easier, because when you have editors that don't know anything, and you go, here, put that footage of James Hetfield, and well, who's James Hetfield? You don't need to do it. They knew right away how to set stuff up. You didn't have to explain every little word. So that's always a plus. So. Yeah, I was very lucky at that point.
My approach to this is going to be just original music. I'm lucky enough I can play guitar, and I can record quite competently, and I've got like a little network of musicians. So for the one video I've done so far, it was just like an hour and 10 minutes of just riffs, and just try and keep it themed. There's a bit where I'm talking about like kind of the new wave of British heavy metal, but the stuff that's associated with Roadrunner, like Battle Axe, Satan. So I'm like, right, well, let's come up with a few sort of Satan-esque riffs for that bit, blah, 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 and try and make it somewhat faithful.
For something like that, since, that was all early 80s, and most of these bands recorded demos before they put albums out on whether it be major or independent labels, same thing. You're still going to have to pay licensing. But if you could get some of their demos, we did that with a lot of the artists there. We had the demo tracks where they owned, the demo, the recordings and the licensing for those. So if you could use some old demo tracks, that could definitely work out for you.
That could work. Yeah, I've got an idea.
But in some cases, sometimes the publishing companies will buy out the demos too to release for, B-sides or whatever, but you have to look into it. Yeah,
we should do a low budget documentary on documentaries that never got made because of licensing issues.
Yeah, well, a lot of them go straight to YouTube, and then sometimes YouTube will put a ban on it for licensing music banned in this country or whatever. But it's not as easy as people think.
No, certainly.
A lot of business bullshit and politics you have to go through for sure.
Yeah. But jumping into the Roadrunner stuff, you mentioned something about your podcast, which really just interested me, which is it went through Roadrunner. Now, this is something I wanted to talk about later down my research. I kind of knew that Blabbermouth was on Roadrunner, but I don't know what that means. Like, I think it was something like Blabbermouth used the Roadrunner servers, and I'm trying to figure out to what end did that, to whose advantage was this entire thing. So in your case with Shockwave, what was the advantage of being hosted on Roadrunner? Was it just that you'd get more traffic because
exposure? Yeah,
it's just an exposure thing.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure that was the same with Blabbermouth. What they started, they basically, as you say, they host your podcast, so they've already have their website, the Roadrunner website, and obviously to them it brings traffic in. Mine, not so much, but Blabbermouth was huge even back then. So they're going to bring a ton of traffic to the Roadrunner site. Now, financially, I don't know how it worked out for Bori at Blabbermouth, how they made their deal. And that's not for me to say. But obviously, once it got to a certain point, they went on their own. And same with me. I was at the point when Warner Brothers bought out Roadrunner toward the, around 2015, 14, whatever.
2012 was like when the axe dropped, but I think they'd actually owned a considerable amount since about 2006.
Yeah, and then they changed the whole website, the whole design, and that all got, and yeah, it was around 2012 because that's when I got into the documentary. So that's when I kind of stopped doing the skull sections. And that skull sections were kind of dead in the water. I got to give props to my partner, Matt Hartnett, who got me doing it again, because he's like, dude, you got to, because after I stopped the original skull sessions on Roadrunner, after that, I was getting tons of emails. Dude, what happened? You got to bring it back. It's like, I'm too busy doing the documentaries. I'm not going to. But now, since I had this break, Matt said, hey, I'll produce it. I'll, do all the posting. I'll set everything up, and so, we got into it again, which is cool. But yeah, as far as them hosting, for us, it was great because we had, we had that exposure through, and I'm a technical idiot. My whole thing, I'll do the podcast. And even when I did the original one with the Shockwaves Hard Radio, which I still do, I'll still do the podcast for him. Tracy Barnes, he'll post it, I just send him the MP3s, you do the rest, I don't know the codes and all that shit. Back then on iTunes and all that, you had to do all these coding and all this stuff. Now it's easy. You could go through a Spreaker or Anchor, and they could post it through all the different channels, for a fee or whatever. But, back then it was a very difficult thing. So you kind of needed a host to go through to get it. And Roadrunner was great for me. We had a great thing, and I was able to, get some sponsors, and they gave me complete freedom to do what I wanted. And of course, we had Monty on quite a few times, and, it didn't limit me for who, you can't have a Metal Blade band on your podcast, or you can't have the band from this label, nothing like that. It was complete freedom. So for me, it was great. And it was never a big money thing for me. I mean, I might've made some money, through sponsorships and that kind of stuff, through different labels or whatever, bands or whatnot. But, it just was enough money to keep it going. I never looked at it as a big money maker thing. Whereas something like, obviously like Blabbermouth was, a huge thing in its own. So it was wise of them to branch out on their own. But yeah.
But are those old episodes still available anywhere?
Yeah, they are. Well, we've been putting them up as archives. We've got kind of, since that website kind of went down, I've still got all those. And we just, Matt and I said, sometimes there's certain way we try to keep it weekly, the podcast. And sometimes I'm too busy, he's too busy, we can't get, so we'll throw up an archive episode. So that, like at Aerosmith, that was an old episode. That was from like 2008 or something. That was one of the first ones we did. And you could probably hear it. I think that was done before Skype and all that. I think that was done with a little recorder, because little mini cassette recorders I had to record through. So you could definitely hear the difference. But we got some of those archive episodes, but we figured rather than putting them all up, we'll kind of put them up sporadically. And that way it's a good way for us to use as archive interviews. Hey, we don't have a new episode this week, but we got this episode, ready for you, and a cool old archive interview. And people love those old episodes. They love to go back to those. So it's fun.
Yeah. All right. Let's jump into your time with the Bird. How did you become to be hired?
Well, that was the case. It was kind of interesting. It was 1990. I don't remember, it was 91 when I actually moved up to LA, but it was funny. I was living in Orange County, living at home. And, I was doing little stuff in the music business. I was working for some great guys, American Music and Entertainment. And, I was working with, Marty Friedman and a band out of Sweden called Glory, and Jonas Hansen and a few guys like that. I was kind of working out, managing, but, I needed to get out of Orange County. I wanted to get up into LA. And my cousin had a place up in Hollywood, and he was looking for a roommate. So I said, I'm going to jump the gun. I didn't have a job or anything. I said, I'm going to move up, save some money, moved up to LA, right in Hollywood, right off the 101 freeway. On Hollywood Boulevard. And as soon as I moved in, I talked to some friends, and I talked to John Sutherland, who was a good friend of mine. He was an old school guy. You might know him. He worked at Metal Blade for many years, at Zomba Music, at Sanctuary. He's like the master of metal. He's a few years older, but he saw all the bands from Zeppelin from the beginning. He was in my the first documentary, Pioneers of LA Hard Rock and Metal. But anyway, I got word to him that I was moving up to LA, and he was close with Case Wessels, and Case told him, "Hey, I'm coming out to LA, and I'm looking for somebody to run the LA office. Would you be interested, John?" And John had other things going, and John said, "No, but Bob Nalbandian just moved up to Hollywood. You should hit him up." And I didn't really know Case. I knew of him, and he knew me from the fanzine, from Headbanger, because I was, pen pals with, like Ed Van Zyl, who was working with him, ended up working with him at the time before he did Mascot, and the people at Aardschok. So I had kind of a bit of a connection, I guess, in Holland with these guys. So Case was familiar with me, and he said, "Yeah." So it was kind of funny. The day I moved up to LA, I get a call, and I get it, Case Wessels. "Hey, this is Case. I'm in town. You want to meet up?" So we met up like at his hotel, and he basically offered me the job right there. And the funny thing is, I had Roadrunner was pretty small then. Their biggest band, they had just signed Sepultura. They were doing Beneath the Remains, I believe, or I don't know if it came out yet or not, but that was, this was obviously before Slipknot, before, it was Sepultura, and I think, King Diamond was their big band. It was just before Typo Negative. So they were big on the metal circuit, but they were a very independent metal label. And they never had a presence on the West Coast. On the East Coast, they, had a name for themselves with a lot of the bands and stuff. But on the West Coast, they never really had a presence. So that's what they obviously wanted to gain. So he ended up hiring me, and it was really cool. And I basically was the only guy in LA, and I worked out of my apartment the first few months, which was kind of a pain in the ass. They gave me a big phone fax machine. Back then, this was before emails. It was all faxes. So every day I would get like 100-page fax from, because I was doing retail. I was doing radio. I was doing press and publicity. So all those departments sent me all their things, and I had to, get all this together. And it was kind of a mess. And then we ended up getting an office right on Sunset Boulevard that we shared with Vault Management, who were at the time, I think they handled Motorhead and Nazareth, a few bands. Oh, wow. And they had like a one-room office on their floor that was available and that they rented to us. But it was right on the heart of Sunset Strip. Below us was Def American, which became American Records. It was Rick Rubin's label, although he was never there. He always worked out of his limo or whatever, but their whole staff was right below us. And next to us was Scott McGee, Doc McGee's, LA office. And across the street was Geffen Records, and then a couple blocks down was the Rainbow Whiskey and Roxy. So it was like, dude, I'm right in the heart of, the Sunset Strip. So yeah, we did that for a while, and that worked out really, really kind of cool. And it was, I had some good times there.
So you mentioned so I guess the purpose of the LA office, this is where I'm like, you'll notice this as I try and pull dots together, and I try and extrapolate and understand these things out loud. It's not great for broadcasting. It's not great to listen to me just trying to figure things out, but you have to just sort of stay with me. So the purpose of the LA office was to establish a presence for Roadrunner on the West Coast, which they did not have before. What is the value of that presence? Is it an A&R presence, or is it just a visibility? What is the value of presence in sort of 1990 United States music industry?
Well, it's funny because I was never talked about A&R. And what I would do if I would because I ended up, once we built a presence, we made the LA office, we had an address, and of course people were sending tapes, and I just basically forwarded them everything to Monty, towards the end, because Monty wanted, because if there's and I would give a little note about what the band was like and whatever, because at that time he was they were trying to branch out of just being a kind of a thrash metal label. Same with Metal Blade at the time. They branched out, they signed the Goo Goo Dolls, and of course, eventually, Roadrunner did the same. They signed fucking great band called Last Crack when I was there. We'll get into that a little bit later. And of course, Typo Negative and a bunch of other bands that were outside the realm of, just the thrash metal thing. But, that was kind of the thing. So they wanted to do that. So that was the case. But I never, I would go see bands, and I would just kind of pass it on to Monty. I didn't really want that responsibility. I don't know if, because Case after asked, oh, dude, what, you should go. If there's a band you like, you can bring it to it, we could sign it. But it's kind of like, I was fresh at the label then, and I was so busy I had to do press, retail, and it was kind of I'll be honest, it was kind of fucked up for me because here I am, I never worked out a label. I didn't know, and I was getting pressure. They had their press person, and no disrespect to any of those guys there, but they had their press guy in New York, their retail guy, and the radio guys there, and they would all push for me to do, oh, don't, radio is more important than press, don't do this. And the press go, no, you got to get the press, no, retail, you got to do that. And the bottom line, they were all kind of jealous that I was like this one-man operation and lived in sunny California, running this, because I think a lot of those guys were hoping to get that job, that they would have flew one of them over to run the office. That was kind of my understanding from a lot of people there that was saying that. So I had a lot of pressure on, oh, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. It was kind of like I was just overwhelmed with shit. But I think I built a good presence. I mean, I got, like there were magazines like, BAM and Music Connection. I got, a big feature on them, and Music Connection. I got Monty Connor, a big A&R feature on there. And so I built them a presence. I got even in the Hollywood Reporter, a little thing on Sepultura, which was a big magazine. It's a entertainment TV mag. So, I built, and then, all the local magazines, the Rock City News and all the rags that were, big. They were, free, like the BAM, I don't know if the, LA Weekly, those kind of things, So, all the news sections and all that, we were starting to build a bit of a presence. So, that was good. And I was calling all the radio stations. We were getting some good radio reaction, Canny C was the big LA hard rock metal station, and we're getting a little bit of traction with them and some of the, obviously the college stations. So, it worked well, but, LA is such a spread out market, and it's such a big market. And, it was kind of it was a stressful job in a way, because I was just, come at it at all angles to do all this stuff.
The reason I laughed really hard is because I was speaking, one of the first interviews I did for this was Steve Ricardo.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I remember Steve. I didn't work at Roadrunner with Steve. I think he was there prior to me. He was one of the first. He was exactly what you were, but for the New York office. Oh, wow. Okay.
So,
I knew him at Enigma. He came to Enigma later, and I had a band that were on Enigma. No, this is This is 84. He was at Enigma. So, or 86 when we signed. When was he at Roadrunner? He was
opening the office. So he was opening the office with Holly Lane. So he was 86, and he was there for about 10 months.
Okay.
And it was the exact same experience. It was like, dude, we were just overwhelmed. We had no idea.
That's how I was. And of course, I never had any, I was a fanzine guy. I was a metal fan. I didn't know about, the business and how that worked. And it was all thrown at me. And, it was cool. I mean, I got no regrets. It gave me good knowledge on the business and the independent stuff. And, this is when, you had all the foundations form and the FMQB and the CMJ conventions and all that stuff. And we go, it was a fun time to be in the music, a great time to be in the music business, but it was definitely overwhelming. Yeah.
I'd let's look, because part of the documentary narrative is like, a lot of people think that Roadrunner is like an American label. It's not. It's a Dutch label, and it's born of this really interesting era in music. And that's why formed Case, blah 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 blah, and then they come to America, this big expansion. And when you hear that chapter of the story, you're just faced with Steve Ricardo going, it was a fucking shit show and I hated it.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there were times I fucking hated it. I ended up kind of leaving the label because it was just like, it just got too much. It was just like, a lot of pressure, but it was a great experience for me for sure.
So who else is with you? Do you ever get another person involved, or is it always you?
No, it was just me. It was just me, actually. I should say I had a good friend of mine, kind of as an intern, and my buddy Sean Duncan, who plays with DC4 now. He was in Odin, Jeff Duncan's brother from Armored Saint. Great drummer. What's up, Sean? And he used to just come around, and he goes, "Hey, man, he wasn't working at the time. He goes, I could help you out, do some stuff for free or whatever." So I would have him call some of the stations and stuff. So, and I let Roadrunner know I got this guy doing, and because I had to call, like I said, for 3 different departments. I had to be, and if it was flipping, hey, this Sepultura record slipped, you got to get back on radio, you got to get on them. So I had to concentrate more, and then the retail guy was, hey, you can't neglect the retail, you got. People don't know retail back then. You actually had a retail market to call up record stores and to go to record stores, and which is kind of fun. At the time, Dino was working at a record store on Hollywood Boulevard, and this is just before he got involved with the Roadrunner. And I was going. I just talked to him the other day because they put out a new record, Fear Factory, and we talked about those old days. And he was like this total. He reminded me from 10 years earlier how he was this avid tape trader. And we're talking 1991, and in the record store they had demo tapes for sale. And he was pushing all these bands, and back then he did a lot to help out, all Limp Bizkit and System of a Down and Static X and Cold Chamber. He brought a lot of that stuff over to Monty's attention. But he was like a guy at the record store. So he was a guy I would call, and other people like that. You would call up the record stores, and you would have to mail them free stuff and talk to them. You'd have to get the metal fans on there. You would want them to play the music in the record store and push it to their, it's about pushing it to their fans. So, I have to explain that now because people don't understand record stores. What? Yeah, they don't get that stuff. But
no, you need to explain it, because I hate it when anyone does an interview, or when I do an interview, it's less of an interview, more of a conversation. But when people say, "Oh, we didn't have the internet back then," I'm like, man, that's the line that tells me I've not been interesting enough, and someone's had to say that. But the simple fact is, this is why I'm asking about the present stuff, because that mattered more. The physical and tangible human being going into a shop and saying, "Look, can you just push this last crack record, please? Yeah. Look, I'm from Roadrunner down the road. I know Brian Slagle rocks up here every Tuesday, but it's Wednesday now, and I want you to push." That's the kind of transactory nature.
And that means a lot. I mean, back in the day, and you hear about stuff in the 70s, like bands like Rush, they were about to be dead in the water. And then some guy played Working Man, out of a Chicago station, and that became a thing. Then everyone started playing it, and that's basically what happened with Metallica and all these other bands. You got one person to get it, or a major giant record store like Tower Sunset at the time, if you could get them to push some of the stuff, and that's where they get all the celebrities coming at, and it becomes, oh wow, I heard this band at Tower Records, and it's so it did mean a lot back then. Absolutely,
yeah. That's crazy. It's because it's just a dynamic I never even thought about. Because with Roadrunner, you hear all about the territory, so the UK territory, the German territory, and you understand that because, as I understand it, it's an A&R tactic. You want British bands, and the best way to get British bands isn't to fly case over every 2 days. It's to get an A&R function there. But when it becomes domestic and it's just LA, I'm like, well, what's the actual function? Because you got New York, which is effectively the de facto headquarters as far as the rest of the world's concerned. So what's LA doing? But you've kind of hit the nail on the head, especially at the time in the early 90s. But it was high culture, very high culture was LA at the time. So you were in the middle of everything, and you were therefore in a much more advantageous position to take advantage of just de facto opportunities that happen there. I get that's my takeaway at the minute anyway.
Definitely. And when bands came into town, whether it be, a Typo Negative or Sepultura or whatever, they would come in and play on the tour. I would bring in, a lot of press interviews and that kind of stuff. And I remember when, a Typo were on their first album, they opened, what was it, Slow, Deep and Hard, I think it was called. They opened for The Exploited, which was kind of an interesting bill at the Hollywood Palladium. And I just remember bringing in tons of press during their sound check or during the thing, and them being interviewed, and everyone says, oh, Pete's, watch out for Pete, he's very difficult to work with. He was the sweetest guy. He was like so cool. He's like, hey man, thanks man, you really got us a lot of interviews, you're really good, and he was very thankful. He was a really, really cool guy. And a lot of people were interested in, because that way they were getting a little bit of buzz with that what was that song? I'm fucking your girlfriend's. I
know you're fucking someone else.
Yeah, that was and that was kind of a big thing. A lot of people it was kind of the buzz song. So there was some interest in them, very, very. And this was like a couple years before they broke big. So it was exciting, and that you're kind of building this kind of new thing on the West Coast. And again, they were a big East Coast band, of course, with Carnivore and all that. But on the West Coast, nobody really knew of them. So it was my job to kind of build a bit of a presence on that, in the LA magazines and some of that kind of stuff. So
I appreciate being very articulate and thorough on that message, just because it's taken. I've been doing this project for must be 8 months now. And it actually was kind of news to me that there was an LA office in the first place. Only the last few months that I realized it was really a thing. But it makes a lot of sense.
I was going to say, after I left, Kathy Merritt ran the LA office for, I think, several years after that. I don't know if
I was speaking to her on Saturday.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. So she's probably got some stories too. And she worked, I think by that time, they had a couple people working there. They had an actual office going on. Yeah, they had that office going for a while after I left. They kind of put an end to it, and then they got her involved and
restarted it again.
Yeah,
I guess it must have been all right, because it wasn't a dedicated building. It was one part of an already active office which they rented out to you. So I guess it was kind of easy to just shut it down and bring it back up.
It was
again.
basically a one room. It was like the size of a big bedroom. Basically one room office. But it was cool because I shared, the floor with Vault Management, and they had this giant balcony patio that overlooks Sunset Boulevard. So that's just at night I could hang out. I could go to the Whiskey and the Roxy, and sometimes at night I would go have some friends over, some chicks over on the balcony and whatever. And if I got too drunk, I had a couch in the office. I would just crash out on the couch, wake up in the morning, get on the phone and call. So yeah, I don't know if they knew that, but it was kind of cool. And that wasn't all the time. It did happen a couple times when I got wasted, but yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
So how did it end? Tell me through it ending then. So at what point were you like, this is getting a bit much now, boys and girls?
Well, that's what it was. It was getting a bit much. And I was working with a band called Armed Forces I had a band called Eden that were on Enigma, and that after the record came out, the singer left, and that kind of split that apart. And he had this band Armed Forces, and they signed with Bizarre Straight Records, and he kept telling me to get on with them, and it was Herb Cohen's label. If you know about Herb Cohen, he started the label in the 60s with Frank Zappa, Bizarre Records, and they had Screamin' Jay Hawkins. They had all the Bizarre bands. All the early Alice Cooper was on Straight, the first two Alice Cooper records. And they had all these different. Tom Waits was on the label. So any band that was kind of weird and bizarre back then, and they just basically relaunched the label through Rhino. And I think Rhino was going through, it was kind of a clusterfuck at the time because they were going through SEMA at the time. Then Rhino switched over to Warner Brothers, WIA. So there was a big change over there. And so anyway, he kept trying to get me to work with him. And then it wasn't working out with Roadrunner. It was kind of a mutual thing. I think they kind of knew it, and I spoke with Doug Keogh, who was the president, who was a great guy. Really, I don't know if you spoke with Doug.
We haven't spoken to him directly. We're in cahoots, is what I say.
Yeah, I don't know. He left. I don't know what he's doing now, but he was a guy really. He kind of got what I was going through, and he was really cool. He was like the VP at the time, and so I spoke with him, and it basically said, hey, this isn't going to work out. And then I started and to be honest, working at Bizarre, I was getting paid pretty much the same, but it was like this is great. I'm working with one or two artists. I would work sometimes with some of their other bands. There's other artists called Francis X and the Bushmen. And then I would work some of their, they had all these classic, Solomon Burke, Screaming Jay Hawkins. So I would, kind of be involved a little bit with that stuff, but I was mostly like the rock guy, and they were kind of building, it wasn't like they had big with Roadrunners. They would sign bands every other week. There would be a new death metal band. Oh, this week you're working with Gorguts. What frustrated me a lot, and I'll get to this band who I know this is part of your questions, who I thought really should have made it, was Last Crack. When that Burning Time record came out, the second record, I was like, oh my God, this could be huge. This is a great record. Dave Jordan produced this was like, major label kind of greatness. And, of course, they went over budget on that record and they gave it a push, and then it was like on to the next. And I'm kind of like, no, man, you can't just go on to the next. This is a band that's going to take a while to build. You can't let this record go. Let's keep going, but they had to keep the machine going. They had to keep, realize that, hey, maybe we have to just move on. And, Sepultura was starting to take off then. And then they got all these other new, thrash bands that, Obituary, Deicide, all this other stuff. And I was never into the death metal scene. That wasn't my thing. I had to kind of bullshit my way talking to the radio guys. They'd be like, oh yeah, man, the vocals on this new Gorguts record is so much, it kind of reminds me of Obituary meets, and I'm like, oh yeah, I totally agree. I know what you're saying. It's like, I didn't really know that market, but it was kind of that kind of thing. So, anyway, it was kind of like, it wasn't really for me, to be honest.
Sell Last Crack to me then, because I've listened to a little bit, because I've been trying to just go through every single record that Roadrunner put out, like as a direct signing, so I can get a feel for it. But I haven't meditated on it. So describe or sell Last Crack to me.
It's fun. They were kind of in that market, that I will say, that alternative metal. They had that, so to speak, a bit of that Seattle sound. And a lot of people thought they were a Seattle band, because that was this joke back then, is if you're from Seattle, boom, everyone wanted stuff from Seattle. I remember trying to pitch them to KNAC, and they really liked it. They said, oh, Dave Jordan, yeah, there's, and then I'm talking to the music director. Yeah, I think we're going to add them. They said, we really love the Seattle bands. And then I said, oh, yeah, great. I love the Seattle bands too, but actually, Last Crack, they're from Madison, Wisconsin. They're not from, and they're like, oh, they're not from Seattle? I said, no, they're from Wisconsin. But they, they kind of got that, Dave Jordan who produced Alice in Chains. And, they got that kind of sound. Oh, well, I thought they were from Seattle. And just because they weren't from Seattle, they ended up it was just dumbest thing, It was like, and I should have said, oh yeah, they're from Seattle. Yeah, if I knew it was good, But it was that kind of mentality. They just did not get that break, But people love that record, and now they came out with an album recently on EMP Records, Combat, David Ellison's label, and fantastic record. We're talking, 30 years later, and still amazing. There's Butto is just such an amazing singer. But I thought that was a band that really could have broke that. Unfortunately, just had bad luck, and of course they had a lot of internal problems with Butto and the rest of the guys. He ended up leaving, and which is always the case with stuff. So I guess maybe in the end, Roadrunner made the best decision not to invest so much money into them when the band, eventually was bound to fall apart. But for it is what it is. But I thought that was a great record. I thought that could have been something pretty huge.
I'll give it a proper whirl, because I've been looking through the trades and consumer press to try and, because I'm really tedious with this project, so I'm trying to figure out what was the Roadrunner press strategy like and things like that. And I found a few weird patterns with the UK press. It's all really boring shit, but I like it. And Last Crack do get a fair bit of a push in that period. They have got their fingerprints all over the press. You got some good press for them, and I got some good press on the West Coast. It just did not translate for whatever reason into sales. It never got that, because at that point, this is the thing. If you're an underground thrash death metal band, you're on that underground level. You could sell 10,000 records and make good money. Those bands,
you put them in the studio for $3,000-4,000, $5,000 at the time. I don't know how much, they'd churn out records. They would tour in a van on their own, this and that. I think that The Last Crack, that was their biggest budget record at the time. I don't know if I should say, but it was like $80,000, which was pretty huge then with Dave Jordan. And then they had a whole mixed up with the tape. They ran out of budget. So the mix isn't that great on it because, Roadrunner said, hey, we're out of budget after $80,000 was a lot of money. So you're going into the next territory. And when you're dealing with bands like Last Crack, you're dealing with, the sound, all those bands that were coming out with records, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains and, Jane's Addiction and all those kind of bands that you're having to compete in that marketplace with, because we were trying to get them on KROQ and all those labels. And of course, back then, Pearl Jam, the major labels had the money to push, to the radio stations and to everything else to do that. Roadrunner wasn't quite there yet. They got there afterwards, but this was a little too premature, I think. I think if Last Crack came out at the time, when Slipknot or Nickelback, came out, when Roadrunner was a bit more established, it would have been a different story. But
yeah. Who was your favorite to work with in your brief time?
Last Crack, although I never really worked with them personally. I met with them when they were in LA. The guys in Malevolent Creation came into town. They were super cool guys. Even though, again, I'm not a big death metal guy, but they were really cool guys, really great band. And Pete Steele was super, super cool. Like I said, when I met with him, it was always a thing. Oh, be careful with Pete. Oh, Pete, but he was a sweetheart, really cool guy. So yeah, I would say those bands. Sepultura, they were cool. We went on their bus to do the video shoot for, was it Arise? I think it was Arise. It was the Arise record actually that I was working at, that had just come out. And I was on the bus with Sepultura. We went out to the desert. I don't know if you remember that desert shoot where they're on the crosses in the middle of, and we had to go like 5-hour drive on this kind of tour bus. And I was with Billy Gould and Dino from Fear Factory when he was just forming Fear Factory, and he's pitching me his new band, Fear Factory, and him and Billy were friends, and it was a great trip up there. And so I remember that was a lot of fun. But those were the bands. Like I said, I was only there for about a year. So, yeah, but it was good. It was a good experience for me. No regrets.
Being a man who knows your way in and out of the business, and you've obviously had a history with all these people, what do you consider the legacy of Roadrunner to be? Because I know what I think it is, but I came in 15 years ago when I was like 16 years old. That's when I sort of that's my heyday. So I have an idea of what I think the legacy is, but I'm trying to get the perspective from other people as well. So what do you think the legacy of Roadrunner is? And I know it's a bit of an open-ended question.
Yeah, you mean the legacy as far as what band? Or what band?
Well, the thing is, for me, it's like, well, look, you look at the Slipknots and Nickelbacks of the world, and they managed to go toe-to-toe with the mainstream music, and they were a disruptive force and a disruptive vehicle for the wider music industry. So I think their legacy sits somewhere in there. And I sometimes think, what could have been if the Warner deal didn't happen? Where would we be sat now? Would we be talking, or would Roadrunner still be an independent entity, still innovating? That's where my headspace is always at when I think about the legacy of the label.
Well, the interesting thing about the independent labels back then, it's funny, when I was working for Roadrunner, nobody gave them respect on the West Coast. Oh, they're the independent death metal label. I would meet with people at, clubs like, the Coconut Teaser would have an industry and ASCAP industry thing. And, oh yeah, that's Bob. He works for that small death metal label. And they would joke, these are guys that worked at Columbia and all. And of course, everyone had the egos and stuff. And they're like, oh yeah, you got that death metal, yeah. Someone, they kind of mock it and whatever. And it's like, hey, fuck you, whatever. But it was kind of that kind of vibe. But Monty was very smart, and I think, and so was Case. Obviously, they knew how to grow that label, and very similar with Metal Blade. They started out with all these very underground, thrash metal bands, death metal bands, very underground music. And the thing about it was, I always thought at the time, for me, dude, you're signing way too many bands. But their whole thing is you sign a bunch, 10 bands, and, you know, for not a lot of money, but these underground bands, they will bust their ass. They're not, the problem with these Hollywood bands that I signed with the major labels, they have this rock star attitude. No, we're going to wait till we play, you know, the country club and then play, you know, the Hollywood Palladium. We're not going to go out on this little mini tour in a van. And, you know, I mean, a lot of them did do that. You know, I'm not saying all of them, but the thing about the thrash death metal bands, they were just so happy to get a fucking record deal. You know, even if it was a small kind of, you know, few $1,000 record deal, they would bust their ass, go out on the tour, and they would sell 10,000 records, these guys, on their own, word of mouth, get on all these college radio stations underground. They built that to the extent where they were able to break a band like a Typo Negative. You know, they had enough money and enough clout at that time, and it's all about building the label. And you could say the same with Metal Blade, with, you know, they broke with the Goo Goo Dolls. You know, it was outside of the realm of the Metal Blade regular rosters. Roadrunner broke with Nickelback, who was way outside of that, but they built that independent label into almost like a major label status, where they were able to break a band like Nickelback at the time. And prior to that, Slipknot, you know, that was a big thing. And prior to that, Typo Negative, I think Typo Negative was their first platinum album. And once they got to that level, then they kind of got the respect. Whoa, Roadrunner, they, you know, before then it was, when I was there, they were kind of, I mean, I don't want to say they were like a joke of a label, but on the West Coast, they, you know, it might have been different on the East Coast, but people are Roadrunner, that death metal label. All they do is that crappy death metal shit, you know, blah blah blah. You know, we got, you know, we got Nirvana, we got the real shit. You got, you know, it was kind of that kind of attitude. But I think once, you know, Typo broke and they were on, you know, major radio and major, you know, and that's what led to Slipknot, and that's what led to, you know, Nickelback and everything else. So it was a small growing process. And that's what was cool about the independent labels, that they took their time to grow. And now if you look at it, what went on the music scene, I mean, we're jumping, you know, 30 years later with all the bullshit going on. What are the big labels now? The major labels don't mean shit. You know, you look at Nuclear Blast, Roadrunner, Metal Blade, Century Media. They've almost got more clout in the, at least in the hard rock metal world, maybe not in the pop world, but in the hard rock and metal, they're the big labels. They're bigger than the majors in that sense, you know, because they did it right. They did it from a grassroots level, and you got to respect that. And I respect the hell out of Monty. He was very smart, and how he you know, signed artists and budgeted them and worked with them. And so yeah, I give credit to the whole staff there, you know.
Yeah, interesting.
They did it right.
I have no more questions for you about Roadrunner, unless you've got either a story or an anecdote which I didn't touch upon, which maybe you've been thinking about while, you know, in the last couple of days.
No, man, it was an interesting time. I was naive, very naive. Like I said, I started, you know, and of course at the time I was like, you know, I just moved to LA. I was in my early 20s or whatever, and I was like, yeah, I was going out every night partying, and it was, you know, kind of like, you know, I took it, and part of my job was to go out and see bands, you know, and I would report to Monty if there was, you know, bands that were good or whatever. But that was, you know, I was just like, hey, man, this is fucking great. You know, I'm getting paid to just party and get drunk and, you know, hang out and see metal bands. And, you know, and at the time, that was when all the clubs were going on, you know, in LA, the Cat House, the Exposure 54, and, you know, Bordellos, and, you know, whatever other Scream, all the nightclubs. They had, every night had a different, you know, Thursday night KNAC Thunderdome, and every night there was a different metal night, you know, in Hollywood. So it was just like, I was out every night. You know, I had a blast. It was a great time.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm going to let you get on with your day, but I'll thank you very much. I'll tag you in all the socials, and I'll keep in touch as things progress.
Right on. All right, Jim. Well, I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, cheers, Bob. All the best, mate.
Okay.